In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about ethical theory, maybe about what some ethical theories are, sort of how ethical language works, and I'll give you an example to kind of motivate a couple ethical theories. So first, I want to start with this diagram. Ethical theory is about theories of right action specifically. So there are three sort of broad kinds of theories. If we wanted to add some more distinctions in, we could, but roughly, I think ethical theories break into these three groups: consequentialist theories, deontological theories, and virtue ethical theories. And then when each of those theories, you get different, more specific versions of them. So act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism are two different kinds of consequentialist theories. Within deontology, there are different principles like Kant's principle of universalizability or Kant's principle of humanity. And then within virtue ethics, there are different versions of that as well. So you might have an exemplarist virtue ethics or target-centered virtue ethics, and you'll learn a little bit more about those in some other videos. Right now, what I want to do is look at kind of like the big theories, maybe how those theories work, and try and motivate them a little bit. Before we look at an example, I want to talk about some key concepts. So these theories of right action are all telling us when an action fits into one of the following categories. So you'll see on the left, there's obligatory actions, permissible actions, they're morally impermissible or wrong actions. And those are kind of the main categories. There are also some sort of categories in between those, like supererogatory acts and suberogatory acts. Those aren't particularly common. At least the terminology is not very common. The concepts might be kind of common. But anyway, we'll focus on sort of the main categories: obligatory, permissible, and impermissible. So what it means for an act to be morally obligatory is that it must be done. You have to do it. And it not legally, right? But morally. In order to be a good person, to meet your moral obligations, you've got to do this thing. So if you have children, for example, we think you're morally obligated to care for your children. You can't sort of neglect them. That would be problematic. So that's an obligation, a moral obligation. As far as permissible actions go, those are the sorts of actions that may be done, but don't have to be done. So something like eating breakfast is a morally permissible action. You can do it, but you don't have to, and we don't think you're good or bad, better or worse for having eaten breakfast or not. And then finally, there are the morally impermissible or wrong actions. These are the kinds of actions that must not be done. You can't do them. And an example of this might be breaking a promise. So if someone asks you to do a thing and you promise them to do it, then it seems like it would be wrong for you to break that promise. In the ordinary case, there might be exceptions, but generally that's wrong. Supererogatory and suberogatory are acts that are maybe good, but not obligatory. In the case of supererogatory. In the case of suberogatory, these are actions that are bad, but not wrong. So a supererogatory act might be donating money to charity. People think that that's a good thing to do, and they encourage it. It's praiseworthy, right? But maybe they don't think that it's obligatory. You don't have to do it in order to be a morally good person. A suberogatory act, right? Something that's maybe bad but not wrong. Something like taking long showers. In a way, taking a long shower is not. It's not like breaking a promise. It's not like stealing something or murdering someone, right? But it is maybe bad. And so we might look down on someone that takes long showers, but we don't think that they've sort of committed the kind of violation that counts as a wrong action or an impermissible action. All right, now to just motivate a couple of theories, I want us to consider an example. The example is called like the dying millionaire. Imagine, right, that you're on a desert island and you're the person on the left here, no shirt, hole in the pants, and there's a dying millionaire. Maybe he's got a briefcase of some sort, and he's got all this money, and he says, as my last dying wish, right, I'm starving. I'd like you to give the money I have left to Dan Gilbert, the owner of the Cleveland Cavs. Maybe he's a lifelong Cavs fan. He really has enjoyed watching them be successful when LeBron James was in Cleveland, and he wants them to be sort of like restored to their former glory. Maybe he wants them to be able to sign another player. So he says, I'd like you to give my money to them. Maybe he has a briefcase. Maybe he's just, got the password to some bank account or something. Whatever the case is, right? He says, I'm not going to give you this money unless you promise me. And so, what's a person to do in this situation? But, make the promise. So you say, sure, I'll do it. Now the person sort of dies, the millionaire, right? He was on his last legs. He dies, and you have this password, you have this money. Now you need to be rescued, and let's say that you are rescued and you go home, and when you're at home, you're thinking, okay, I'm going to give this money to Dan Gilbert. And before you can do that, though, you get a letter in the mail, and the letter says, there's a famine in East Africa, and if you can donate money to the Red Cross, let's say, then each $2,000 you donate will save a child. And in this case, you're sort of like, wow, $2,000 is a lot to save a child, but then you remember, right? You've got $20 million. Now I'm afraid that I might mess up the math here, but I think something like if you had oh no, it's either 2,000 or 20,000, or sorry, 10,000. But anyway, you can save a bunch of kids if you donate this money to the Red Cross. But that would be going back on your promise to the millionaire. Okay. So there's this question: what do you think we should do? Should you give the dying millionaire's money to Dan Gilbert, or should you donate it to the Red Cross? It seems like a tricky question. What should you do? The final thing I want to do here in this video is just say, well, there's some standard responses. So there's sort of like two obvious choices, right? On the one hand, you might think we should give the millionaire's fortune to Dan Gilbert because that's what you promised to do. And breaking a promise is wrong, and so you've got to give the money to Dan Gilbert. This kind of intuition, people who have this intuition might be like sort of more on the deontological side of things, right? So they think that there are some things that you have to do, even if they're not going to bring about the best results, just because of something that happened in the past. So I think of deontological views as generally like second personal, backward-looking views. So your obligations really stem from your relationships with individual people. You made a promise in this case. That's something that happened in the past, so it's backward-looking, and it's that relationship you had with the dying millionaire that generates your obligation to donate the money to Dan Gilbert. The other kind of response is that you should donate the money to the Red Cross, and this view, or this sort of answer is motivated by the thought that it's going to do way more good donating it to the Red Cross than it would do if you gave it to Dan Gilbert. If you have this view, right, maybe you're sort of more on the consequentialist side of things. So this intuition, if you have it, right, speaks in favor of kinds of consequentialist views. And these views are more third personal, forward-looking views. So they sort of say, well, you do have these particular relationships to people like the dying millionaire, but you also have relationships to people who are dying overseas. You may think it's not a very close connection, but consequentialism sort of takes the God's eye point of view, right? This very third personal, objective standpoint. And it just looks forward, right? The fact that you made a promise, who really cares about that? What matters is how much good you can do going forward. So that's that kind of view. Consequentialism speaks in favor of donating the money to the Red Cross. Now there's another kind of view, virtue ethical views. They're sort of what I think of as first personal views, and they're more about, they sort of emphasize what is it that a good person would do. What is sort of the best version of yourself? What would that person do? I don't think this case draws out virtue ethics real well, but there are other cases that are. We'll probably talk about them in a later video. So anyway, this is sort of to motivate us to think, well, there are tricky cases like the case we have right here. And in order to figure out how to answer that or figure out what to do in this case, we need to sort of scrutinize our moral views more carefully. We need to figure out, in a case like this. Should we generally keep the promise, or should we maximize utility? And I don't know, maybe there's no like clean answer to that, but the thought is that if we think really carefully about it, if we sort of look at the implications that all these views have, we're going to get closer to the right view about how to act in these scenarios. All right, that's the end of the video. There are going to be some other videos available about deontology, consequentialism, virtue ethics, but I'll stop there for now. All right.